Okay, well, we're going to continue in our series now on the study of the book of Romans. I don't know if you noticed, but when you read your newsletter that you get online every week faithfully, or when you looked at the PowerPoint, there was no title mentioned. Did anyone even notice that? Does anyone care about the title of a sermon? Well, this was the title of the sermon in the working notes of the preaching plan, The Exemplary Value of Abraham's Faith. I can see why it wasn't put in. You're here now, so this is the title. But as I looked at that, I thought it's not particularly gripping. And in fact, as I began preparing, I had to look up the word exemplary to ensure I understood it. And this is, and I thought since we're defining one word, I'll do another word too, and that's faith. So, this is the definition of exemplary. In the dictionary, it is defined as something that serves as a desirable model, illustrates a general rule, or serves as a warning or deterrent. I remember when I was studying that we would sometimes receive something called an exemplar. It's a model answer. It's a document to show you what they are expecting you to present and how they're expecting you to present your answer. What is required of you, in other words. And so as we examine today's passage, we see a model of what is expected of us. But before doing that, let's also consider faith. When the word is used, what does it mean? So in general, in the dictionary, the world uses this word faith a lot. And the dictionary definition is one of them is that the word faith is a confidence or trust in a person, a thing, or a concept. Like I said, it's quite commonly used. Some of you might be old enough to remember and have heard the George Michael song, Faith. Yes? Now you're going to have it running around in your head through the rest of this sermon. I've got to have, what is it? I wrote it down because I can't remember. Because I've got to have faith. I've got to have faith because I've got to have faith. I have to have faith. It was a really deep song about faith. But, you know, the world is full of things like this, isn't it? We're told, we grow up and you know, in sport, you know, have faith in yourself. You've got to visualize yourself winning. You are going to be the best. You can do it. Rely on your own abilities. Have confidence. Have faith in yourself. So it's used a lot in that sense. In a general sense, we have faith in many things. I flick on a light switch and a light turns on. I'm an accountant, not an electrical engineer. I have no understanding of how that happens. But what I know is this. I know that unless certain things have happened, i.e. there's a power cut, that if I turn that light switch on, that light will go on. I fly on a plane that looks like this plane. It looks like a brick. The first time I went on one and I'm walking along and think, good grief, I didn't realise, double story, it is a brick. I don't know how that brick flies. I don't. But I know it has flown and I have faith that it will fly, so I hop in the plane and let them shut the door and lock me in for 19 hours. It's faith. So if we break it down, there are two parts then, as I see it, in these examples that are talking about, that illustrate faith. The first is a mental belief. I believe the light will, you know, mentally, I go, I've seen a light switch go on and turn a light on and the light goes on. I've seen that happen. Okay, I mentally understand not how it happens, but it does happen. I've seen planes fly. Mentally, I believe, yeah, okay, planes fly. But that does no good for me. Having a light, if I think, yes, the light will come on when I turn on the switch, the plane will fly when I hop in it, it'll do no good for me unless I actually switch the light on, actually take an action. Switch the light on or hop in the plane and do my seatbelt up. You see, you need the second part. The first part is just knowledge. The second part, the action, is the trust, the actually putting it into action. Now, there's no problem in having faith in a light switch or in a plane. In one case, you'll get light. In another place, you'll get from point A to point B. But neither of these things can make you right before God. And so we want to look at what biblical faith is. When we talk about faith in a biblical sense, what are we talking about? In Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1, we read these words. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. The first thing to notice is that in here there is no mention of feelings, no mention of our own abilities, no mention of our own ideas and our own ways of doing things. Rather, there are two things I want to point out here. There's assurance and there's conviction. There's assurance about things hoped for, so the future. And there is conviction about things not seen, the past. One writer put it this way: our faith is in what God has done and in what God will do. So let's take that and consider the example Paul has given us in today's passage of Abraham. As a reminder, we're working in Romans chapter 4, and as a reminder, the first 17 verses Paul has been going through, and he's saying your righteousness, your right state, being made right with God, is not gained by works. We talked about that. It is not gained by circumcision. We talked about that. It's not gained by obedience to the law. So if it's not gained by those, how is our righteousness gained? So let's read Romans chapter 4, verses 18 to 22. Even when there was no reason for hope, Abraham kept hoping, believing that he would become the father of many nations. For God had said to him, that's how many descendants you will have. And Abraham's faith did not weaken, even though at about 100 years of age he figured his body was as good as dead, and so was Sarah's womb. Abraham never wavered in believing God's promise. In fact, his faith grew stronger, and in this he brought glory to God. He was fully convinced that God is able to do whatever he promises. And because of Abraham's faith, God counted him as righteous. So what's the example of Abraham's life and faith? Well, remember in Genesis chapter 12, God said to Abraham, you, your family, I want you to leave this land and go to another land that I've promised you. And I'm going to make you into a great nation. You'll have many descendants. Not just your family and many descendants, but he said, but all people on earth will be blessed through you. God, probably 25 years, I believe about 25 years before, this is what God had promised to Abraham. He told Abraham, this is going to happen. No ifs, no buts, no maybes, no conditions. I am going to make you into a great people. And all peoples will be blessed because of you. And then in Genesis 15, we have the story where Abraham's a little older now. He's obeyed God. He's gone into this land. And he's wrestling with this issue. He believes God, but he says to God, but God, is that going to have to be through my servant? Because look, I've got no children. So is it going to be another way? And God said to him, no, Abraham, you are going to have your own son, and all peoples will come, and people will come through that descendants. And he took him outside and he said, look at the stars in the sky. As numerous as there are stars in the sky will be your descendants, unable to be counted. And we read again, Abraham believed God, and it was counted as righteousness. So that's what God told Abraham. And what Paul is telling us is that years after that promise was made, when Abraham was so old that he figured he was as good as dead, and so was Sarah's womb, that he was fully convinced that God is able to do whatever he promises. This was a situation now where there was clearly no human hope. What was promised, if anyone humanly looked at that, was said, that is not going to happen. Humanly speaking, I've never seen that. It is not going to happen. But yet we read Paul saying, but Abraham still believed. In fact, he believed more and more that what God said was going to happen. He lived his life out that way. He didn't start making plans for passing stuff over his servant, etc. He did get waylaid with Sarah saying, here, have a child with his handmaiden, Hagar. But he came back and he believed God, what God said would happen. Perhaps he couldn't understand it. I don't know, but he believed it. And this was the faith that Abraham had in God, that God saw and credited as righteousness to him. God had said it. He believed it. Why? How? On what basis? Well, I believe it's that basis we've talked about before, and the definition that the writer in Hebrews said about faith, about the past, the future. Abraham had a past with God. He could look back and see God's hand at work. God was faithful to him. God was there for him. He recognized who God was, the creator and the sustainer of all life. And based on that, he believed what God said going forward. It wasn't just a mental assent. Oh, yes, there's a God. It was, I believe he said this is going to happen. I believe it's going to happen. And he lived his life based on that. It was this faith that was counted as righteous. Now, at this time in my notes, I have a little heading that says, if time, discuss. It's 12 o'clock. No, you thought you would trick me, but it's not 12 o'clock. I'm not getting down just yet. God, in his graciousness, gave us the story, another account, the story with him and Abraham, to show us the extent of his faith. Because you see, Abraham had a child, Isaac, as God had promised. And then he started growing up. And in Genesis chapter 22, we have the story that you probably remember from Sunday school, heard from Sunday school through, about Abraham and Isaac, and God saying, take Isaac to this mountain, and I want you to sacrifice him. And you go, really? Wow. That's a pretty big ask. Is God asking us to kill to sacrifice? And the answer is absolutely not, as we see in this story. But the story gives us there's so much richness in this story in Genesis chapter 22. As they're going up the hill, so they go on this journey, and as they go at the bottom, Abraham said to his servants, "Stay here while the boy and I go up and worship and come back." He didn't say, "While I and the boy go back, and I'll be back without the boy later." His faith. God had said Isaac, from his son Isaac would come generation. So he did not for a minute believe that Isaac would not come back down that mountain with him.